It's all right. You can giggle in the middle of that parable. I think it merits it. It's a really good one and a really hard one. And we're going to do something a little bit different today. It's a little bit less formal. I think you've probably gotten used to me doing this from time to time by now. So here we go. As soon as I heard that parable, I knew I had to share one of my favorite books. It's called She Persisted. Some of you, I think, have seen it before. It's written by Chelsea Clinton and Andrea Boigner. And I'm just going to start out by reading you some selections from it, and then we'll dig in. She Persisted. Sometimes being a girl isn't easy. At some point, someone will probably tell you no. Will tell you to be quiet and maybe even tell you that your dreams are impossible. Don't listen to them. These women, they certainly did not take no for an answer. They persisted. There were people like Harriet Tubman. She was born a slave, and her story could have ended there. But she persisted, escaping from slavery and becoming the most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad. She risked her life many times to lead countless slaves to freedom, including her family, her friends, and strangers even. Every person that she led to freedom, they arrived safely. And then there are people like Clara Lemlich. I don't know if any of you have met her before in your learnings, but after her family fled poverty and the threat of violence in the Ukraine for a new home in New York City, Clara Lemlich got a job working at a garment factory. She wrote that the factory's conditions made women into machines, and so she persisted, organizing picket lines and strikes and ultimately helping to win better pay and shorter hours and safer working conditions for thousands of workers, both women and men. And then there's Nellie Bly. Nellie Bly became a reporter in part because a male writer had said that working women were a monstrosity. And so then she wanted to prove that women could do anything. At times, putting her safety at risk, she persisted throughout her career in exposing real monstrosities, pretending to be a sweatshop worker and a patient in a mental hospital to show how badly people in those places were being treated. Next we have Claudette Colvin, I'm not sure which, but as a 15-year-old running a bus home from school in Montgomery, Alabama, Claudette Colvin was expected to give up her seat to a white woman just because she was African American. In her refusal to get up, she persisted. She persisted in taking a stand for what's right and helping to inspire Rosa Parks to make the same choice 9 months later. An act many point to as the starting of the modern civil rights movement. And the last one I want to share is the story of Sonia Sotomayor. Had to get a judge in there, right, because of today. Watching fictional judges on television inspired Sonia Sotomayor to want to be a real-life judge when she grew up. She knew that she'd have to speak English as well as she spoke Spanish, study hard in school, and manage her diabetes before she could one day wear a judge's robe with a gavel in hand. She persisted, eventually becoming a Supreme Court justice and the first ever Latina to sit on America's highest court. And I'm gonna close this bit with a quote that's in here from her. "I have never had to face anything that could overwhelm the native optimism and stubborn perseverance that I was blessed with." So that's just some of the stories that are in this this wonderful book, and there's a whole series of them. Now, does anyone know the origin of this term, she persisted? A couple of you are shaking your heads. Who was it?
Oh my God,
Elizabeth Warren. Right. So she's in Congress, and they're debating some issue, and somebody tells her that she needs to stop talking. And she's like, nope, I'm not going to be told to shut up. And she keeps talking. And one of the people from the other side of the issue says, oh, nevertheless, she persisted. And that just became a thing after that, because so many people, women in particular, had that kind of experience when they were trying to stand up and advocate in the face of issues, in particular of justice, right? We were talking about this at 8 o'clock, and it turns out Ann Ritchie's son worked for Elizabeth Warren at around this time, and so she shared a little bit of kind of the energy that this brought to their campaign, this sense that they needed to persist because they had something that had to be said, and they were the only ones that could say it. And the great thing is, in 2017, so many people started realizing this was a shared experience and sharing their stories, women and sometimes men, about times when they needed grit and determination in the face of overwhelming odds, and sometimes even rudeness, just to face down in the situation of fighting for social justice. So Chelsea Clinton and Andrea Boigner, their series has now blossomed into something like 26 books. And I was introduced to it because I had to organize some classroom visits for her when she was touring the book. And there's a couple of fun things about that. First of all, I want to say the amazing thing about it was it appealed to the boys just as much as the girls. Everybody found these stories inspiring. The other thing is, I think she was like 8 months pregnant. She's going from school to school to school talking to these kids. Anyway, we all know it takes a lot. Cornel West, who is a kind of a social moral philosopher. I came across him at Harvard Divinity, but he's been all over the place. Is famously known to have said, "Justice is what love looks like in public." Justice is what love looks like in public. And what I love about these stories is these are the kinds of pragmatic examples of what love, God's love, looks like in public when we are called to take part in the unfolding of God's kingdom. Scripture has always made it clear that this kind of pragmatic, tangible justice is part of God's blueprint for humanity. It is the central part of God's blueprint for humanity. And Scripture also tells us from start to finish that humans have an important role to play in the messy unfolding of God's justice. I mean, God's justice meant that the slaves would be freed from Egypt. Yet it took Moses. God had to talk to Moses, had to talk Moses into it, in fact. And then Moses had to keep confronting Pharaoh and confronting Pharaoh and confronting Pharaoh throughout all those plagues. Someone who he had grown up with like a brother, until finally his persistence meant that they were let go. And then came 40 years in the wilderness, right? Nothing easy about that. God's justice had promised that there would be a return from exile in Babylon to God's people. Yet it took prophets like Jeremiah to keep the people knowing that this is the hope that they hold on to, and that God is with them, and that there is a covenant for them that is so deep that it doesn't even need to be written on paper. It will be written on their hearts. And it was God who sent Jesus to proclaim the nearness of God's kingdom of justice and peace and love. It's like it's right here. That's what Jesus came to tell us that. And it was Jesus, and later the Holy Spirit in his place, who sent out regular old men and women just like all of us to do that hard work of fighting for fairness and compassion and reconciliation on a day-to-day and place-to-place and issue-by-issue and time-by-time basis. And it's not easy work, right? It's hard. That's why these kinds of stories of justice warriors are so inspiring to us. But it's also why they can be really daunting. I mean, those character traits, courage, perseverance, strength, those are the kinds of things that I think we very easily count ourselves out on, don't we, sometimes? Like, I couldn't do that. I don't have that in me. I wish I had that in me. I don't know what to do. I think we say that to ourselves all the time. So that's the beauty of that parable. That's one of the things I love about that parable. Because I don't think either of these people, neither the widow nor the judge, they're not heroes, right? Like, you can't see them somebody writing one of these stories about them in that way. But the widow, we don't know a lot about what's going on with her. We don't know what the issue of justice is. It could be something that's been taken from her. It could be something bigger in society. We have no idea. But here's what we do know about her. She is on fire about this. So much so that she's not just asking for justice. She wants vengeance. That's part of what's in that word. And vengeance and or retribution and justice, they kind of overlapped sometimes in the legal systems of her day. But we know that she's on fire about this because the judge, when he relents finally and says, all right, I'll let her have it. Our translation kind of soft pedals it, but he's basically saying, if I don't let her have what she wants, I'm going to end up with a black eye. Now, we don't know if that's metaphorical or she's really that in his face, but we've all seen people who've gotten right over that edge when they're fighting, care so much, and it's so important, right? So, she may be a hero, she may be kind of right skating that edge, but she's a real live person experiencing what it feels like to be in the middle of this. And then there's that judge, right? He's kind of arrogant, I would say. He's pretty disconnected. But the kind of the twist in this is that it might be that that's what gives him the independence to offer her justice. I mean, something's keeping him from doing it. And it might not just be all about him. There's a lot of pressure in the society. It was a patronage society, right? And all sorts of people owed all sorts of loyalties that were pretty structured socially then. We don't know the backstory here. But there's something about who he is and where he's at that he's able to say, you can have this justice that you've been persisting towards and persisting towards and persisting towards. And he does it without creating good guys and bad guys. He's not saying you're right or your opponent's right. He's just saying, all right, let's do this thing. So they're regular people. It's messy. We don't know the full story, but we know that to persist is what we're called to. Of course, Luke, who wrote the gospel and included this parable, is not entirely comfortable with that sense of things. And you can see him, he's framing it in a way that feels a little bit easier for his audience. He's writing, I don't know, maybe almost a century later, and he's got a community starting to think, when is Jesus coming back? When on earth will this kingdom that's promised really come? Because all we can see is more injustice and more hate and more conflict and more sorrow all around us. So what are we meant to do in the meantime? Well, Luke's framing encourages them to say, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, there's definitely one thing you can do, and that is to pray. That's to pray. And sometimes we downplay that. But I think Luke is giving us the permission to not just pray, but to pray with fervor. That means we can scream at God, and we can cry out to God, and we can rail at God about the injustices that we see around us or that impact us or that we're advocating on behalf of. Because Luke's saying, the widow got the judge's attention that way, and so surely God, who is always listening and always cares, will hear you when you do that. No matter how long it takes. Trust in God that justice will be done, and that this is one way that you can take part in that. So the takeaway. I think the takeaway is that this messy, imperfect, but dogged persistence on the part of regular old imperfect people like us in the face of crushing resistance is the kind of thing that justice warriors like us, I'm going to use that word and make y'all uncomfortable, justice warriors like us are all called to be a part of. Pushy, bold, and persistent. So I wonder who inspires you. If you had to tell a story about a she or a he or a they who persisted, who would you tell about? Does anyone, I don't know if anyone, we had a couple shared this morning, one of which was the story of Anne's son. That was a great story, but I'm just curious, one or two of you maybe have a story, someone you've known, someone who's persisted, someone who's inspired you in the fight for justice. Lise, go ahead.
So my younger sister is the executive director of the Adler School of Public Safety and Social Justice.
Wow.
And
the Adler School of Public Safety and Social Justice. Wow.
In Chicago.
Okay.
And in her role as the director, she not only addresses the needs of the community, like she started out with the Chicago Gun Violence Project, which aimed to remove guns from Chicago and was instrumental in bringing gun violence in Chicago down by a huge amount. And she then took the lessons that they learned in that to other countries. Like she has testified before Congress, and she is now working to eliminate the school to prison pipeline in Chicago. They have taken, of the, I want to say like 17 or so schools that had like police stations in the school. They've removed more than half of them.
Wow.
And have put in, they're called restorative justice hubs, where people can learn how to deal with the behaviors that had been, encouraging teachers to send children to the police instead of to, detention or whatever.
Right.
And giving the children in those communities resources to learn how to deal with their differences, deal with their anger, help them with the issues that kind of lead to violence looking like a good solution. And I'm always amazed at the boundless energy that she has to do this work, and how she is not afraid to get up in anyone's face, like anyone's face, and reach out and show love to anyone. And sometimes those are the same thing.
Yeah.
And
sometimes getting up in someone's face is showing love. Thank you. Yeah.
And she is brilliant at it. And whenever I find myself falling down in how I think about the people around me, I think about her example. I know I'm getting all Yeah. And her birthday was yesterday. So
happy birthday. Tell us her name.
Elena.
So happy birthday to Elena, and thank you for sharing the story about how she's persisted. Annie.
Something comes to mind. At Santa Clara School of Law, we have a clinic called that's part of a union called Northern California Innocence Project.
The Northern California Innocence Project. Okay, and this is at Santa Clara School for Law.
Yes,
okay.
It's a national conglomeration, but it's led at Santa Clara it started out with 2 women there who were looking into big holes in the law.
Okay.
This is before we had DNA testing and stuff. That meant people were incarcerated because they needed an answer to a crime. And they were really innocent.
Yeah.
So they spent years putting together all the evidence, and while they're doing it, they teach students that are in law school. and so they're part of these projects, and then they get these people who are really innocent exonerated from incarceration, and the next step is trying to get some compensation, which is not happening yet, a little tiny bit, but not really, that's their next. But so far they've got had 32 exonerations, and these people, some of them are really horrific, but they've been blamed for something like one man that was exonerated about a year ago was put in prison because they said that basically he murdered his baby. And he actually didn't. So the emotional toll that took on somebody who loved his child but then was put in prison for that when he wasn't guilty of it is amazing. So these people they don't make much money. They put their whole lives and soul into making sure these people get justice.
And do you know the two founders' names?
Linda Starr, and I can't remember the other lady's name, because Linda Starr is around a lot. So
Linda Starr and one other woman. And I can only imagine the amount of persistence, because people would say, why are you helping these criminals, right? And yet they were innocent.
It's almost like people are against them because they think, well, maybe they really were guilty, you're helping them get out. Yeah. I mean, they have to have such a preponderance of evidence, it's ridiculous, so that's not likely to happen, but they're just so, that's persistence at its core. Yes.
So two wonderful stories about persistence, one in the legal system and one in the social justice, and any others? All right. Thank you both of you for sharing those stories. They're fantastic, and I know as you guys go out into the day, you'll have other ones that'll occur to you, or you can share during coffee hour. So I just want to close with the closing passage of the book. So, if anyone ever tells you no, if anyone ever says your voice isn't important or your dreams are too big, remember these women. They persisted, and so should you. Amen.